at Climate Change Around the World, Part 4. Okay, so in this one, we're going to be looking at how the climate change is going to affect plants and animals, and about what happens because you have warmer, drier terrain. So we're going to look at plants and animals on the move, warmer, drier terrain. Okay, so the growing seasons have been changing. In some areas of the world, well, in America and other parts of the world, they can have up to 40 extra days of growing. So like 40 extra days of summer. And I don't know why this is not working. Here we go. So this dark green, like in California and Arizona, indicates that they have like 40 more days. And this has also been happening in Europe. And you might think that's great, more days to grow. But unfortunately, it often comes with higher temperatures, decreased rainfall, and so dryness is possible too. So here's some data from the EPA, and you can see how this temperature has been going upwards, and so has this number of days that you have to grow in. Okay, this has also changed the plant zones. When you plant a plant, you're supposed to make sure that it can survive in your area. That's called your planting zone. So we're in zone 5. But those zones have moved upwards. They moved them all upwards a few years ago. And so anyway, so things are heading north. So more plants and animals can survive in the higher northern latitudes where now there are not as many days of freezing, okay, of frost they're called. So anyway, so if you have fewer days of freezing, then the plants have more likelihood of being able to survive. Their roots can survive. Okay, so anyway, so animals and plants are on the move heading north. It's getting too hot in the south, they're heading north. Now, the problem is, of course, not all plants move at the same rates, right? Some get carried, like squirrels carry acorns, right? They plant those. Oak trees take a long time to grow, and so they move kind of slowly. But some things move by the wind, and so what happens is you've got a mixture of plants and animals moving, and some animals and plants will not succeed in finding a new home with the proper temperature and moisture and soil conditions. Now, we've talked about things getting a little drier and hotter, but some areas actually will be receiving more moisture. We were talking about how there can be more moisture in the air. So actually where we live, we are going to be receiving more inches of rain. So it actually has been getting rainier in, as you can see, this part of North America, whereas it gets drier in this part of North America. And so you might think extra rain is great at all times, but it's not. It's already having problems with apples because they get more funguses because they don't get a chance to dry out as much. And farmers, of course, don't always like all that wetness either because then your corn can rot in the field. So again, things are changing. And because of that, crops are more at risk. Now, there's this interesting line, which was the 100th meridian west. That was kind of the divide between moister eastern states and drier western states. So a few years ago, I drove out on Highway 80 and it was corn, 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 and then it was cows, 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 because it was too dry for corn. Anyway, it's actually shifted. And so for a state like Kansas here, that line has shifted halfway across the state, which means that ranchers, okay, and farmers will have to pack up and move too, perhaps, or at least the ranchers can now farm on or run their cattle on more of Kansas. it's less moist. Okay, so that can make a huge difference for a state. Um, some of our favorite foods are at risk. So, coffee beans. Coffee is very sensitive. It has to be grown at the right temperatures. It likes cooler temperatures, so it likes to get grown on mountainsides. Well, it's not so cool on a lot of these hillsides and mountainsides anymore. And chocolate's a very weird plant. It's very hard to get it to pollinate. We don't even know exactly which creatures pollinate it. And the problem is if you say, okay, I'm just going to take chocolate plants somewhere else, well, it's got such a weird flower, you don't know what bugs can pollinate it if you move them to another place. So that's one of the problems. If you want to successfully move plants, you have to move their pollinators too. And so anyway, the coffee is in trouble because of a fungus right now. And climate change has been exacerbating that. So one of the problems is that the coffee that we love most, the Starbucks type coffee, which is called Arabica, um, is more fragile. It can't live with harsh environments. Whereas there's a bean called the Robusto, which is more like if you've ever had Maxwell House, okay, ground coffees that are instant coffees, that's the Robusta flavor. And so anyway, so a lot of us have grown addicted to the Arabica beans, and they are going to get more expensive because they are going to be harder to grow. Now, wine or grapes were grown for thousands of years in the same places, and so different types of grapes come from different areas. So Champagne grapes come from a region called Champagne in France. And so the problem is that the temperatures are changing. So what's happening is grapes are going to have to move too. And so they are moving. They're on the move. People are moving crops. People from France and Spain were buying hillsides in South America because wine grapes need the right temperatures. And if it gets too hot, they don't grow well. Right now, Napa Valley in California, not only is it burning, but it's also getting too hot for a lot of grapes. So they're moving to Oregon. Okay. So anyway, so their grapes are moving to Poland and Czechoslovakia instead of Italy and Spain. So anyway, so that's the thing. Food items have to move if the climate moves. And it's believed that also yields of wheat will fall. So all of a sudden there will be 6% less wheat, less rice, less corn, fewer soybeans. The climate just won't be ideal for those. Now, fish also are on the move. Fish are moving away from hotter areas, trying to get cooler up north. And so fish are changing also. So fish men are having to move their boats to new docks, new ports in different cities because they have to be able to follow the fish. And crabs have moved. So anyway, now also some foods, because of the higher carbon dioxide level, the plant will grow faster sometimes, but it will have less nutrition because its roots won't have taken up enough of the zinc and iron that people rely on in those food crops. Okay, now ecosystems are changing. There are many species, iconic species, ones that we recognize. So like Ohio is called the Buckeye State before the Buckeye tree. And, you think of different plants that are associated with different places and animals that are associated, like moose, right? Those animals and plants may have to move and may disappear from one region and hopefully appear in another, or they may become extinct. So anyway, so the mixture of plants and animals is going to change. And so things like maple trees, they like cooler weather. So they may move out of the New England area if it gets too hot. And sugar maple sap may already taste a little bit different. Buckeyes will move out of Ohio. Magnolias will be moving out of Mississippi. It's going to get too hot. Now, as all these plants and animals are on the move, then that totally changes the ecosystem. So you've been seeing graphs like this your whole life probably, and you know because your teachers told you that if you take out one of those animals, and because you figured it out, you take out one of those animals, it upsets the whole food web. Well, we're going to be driving change in these systems, and I expect some total chaos to result, and a lot of species will probably disappear. Um, so yellow cedars are dying up north because there's not enough snow to cover their roots. Mangroves are wonderful plants and they're great at storing carbon dioxide, but usually they live closer to the equator. They're moving up the coast of Florida. And what this one is, this is a mangrove sitting in a salt marsh. Salt marshes are also wonderful. So let's say you're a park ranger and you see this mangrove growing in your salt marsh, which you're trying to preserve. And so your question, you might say, okay, should I take that mangrove out? But I know that things are going to change. So what do you do? So anyway, there is sort of a plan that I read about once that helps relieve your mind of the either or choice, is for a park to try to sort of divide itself into three parts. One part, they would remove the mangrove because they would try to leave it as is. Okay, so try to keep the salt marsh as intact as possible. Another part, they would just let it go. Let's see what nature does. Let the mangrove stay. In a third part of the park, they might help manage it actively. So they might, if a butterfly disappears, they might try to bring in another butterfly to replace it. So that would be active management to see if they could help the environment change. So anyway, we're not going to be able to preserve everything. And one of the problems with insects is that they often are adapted to a particular flower. So they have these proboscises that go in and they can suck up the nectar, and the thing is that they're often designed to fit in certain flowers, and flowers have made themselves so that they are very complicated, so that they only get a certain type of insect to pollinate them. And all sorts of insects are pollinators, so bees and beetles and moths and butterflies. Um, but what's happening is that sometimes the plants that insects rely on, those plants are blooming earlier because it's getting warm. And so they bloom early. And then there are no bees around, for instance, to pollinate them. So then the flowers die after a while. Then the bees come out of hibernation, and then there are no flowers to give them nectar or pollen. So that is being a problem right now and will continue to be an issue as long as we're messing around with the environment, is that the insects and the plants may not be working together at the same time. So anyway, one of the big problems with that, of course, is we need all those pollinators to help us. Now, minor bees are the tiny little types of bees that we have in this area. And so one of the problems is that the minor bees are at risk too. And so they need their flowers. So plant lots of flowers and make homes for bees. So you can buy a bee house or just drill holes in sticks of wood. And those are great for bee houses. Hang them up for the bees. I keep a bee house on my front porch. So in the spring, it's lovely to see the bees come out of hibernation and start buzzing around my little bee house. Okay, and they like it. It's protected from the rain. It's under the eaves. Okay, so of course you've heard about the rainforest in Brazil getting chopped down and burned. And so what's happening is that is changing the environment in Brazil and the other countries around it, because the rainforest basically produces its own rain. As you chop down the forest, there's less rain. And so places that used to have plenty of rain now have less. Now, why are people chopping down the rainforest? Well, a lot of the rainforests are being, or tropical forests are being chopped down for basically just four commodities. One of them is beef. They're making more places to have cows. They also grow soybeans to feed the cows. And then other things, of course, wood you would expect. But also they're growing a lot of palm trees that produce these big nuts, which is and contain palm oil. And the thing about palm oil is it is a really marvelous substance that can be put in food and it doesn't rot. And so it's probably in, if you had chocolate, it's probably in there. It's in so many foods, it's in makeups. And it is actually a really great thing. And it actually is more environmentally friendly than some other oils. But the problem is that they're chopping down too many forests to put the palm oil in there. And um, so anyway, so if you can eat less beef, that would knock off maybe two of these, and that would be very helpful. So again, eat less beef. One of the consequences of our trade disputes with China was that Americans used to sell soybeans a lot to the Chinese. When they stopped selling, when the Chinese said, okay, well, we're not going to buy your soybeans, they turned to Brazil and said, okay, Brazil will buy your soybeans. So that increased soybean production and forest devastation in South America because the Chinese no longer would buy our soybeans. Okay, so unintended, perhaps, consequences of trade wars. Okay, now there are a lot of beautiful little species, like you've heard of Edelweiss. Those are species that live high up in the mountains, and there are lots of cute little animals and stuff. The thing is, they live in what are called alpine meadows that are up there. A lot of those meadows are sort of above the tree line. There's a tree line where there's snow above that stays all year round almost, and then the tree line won't go up past that. And so a lot of these alpine meadows in the spring are full of flowers and little animals. And unfortunately, as the mountains lose their snow, then the animals and plants will have nowhere to go. They can keep going up to other mountains, but a lot of times there just isn't going to be any snow there. There isn't going to be anything to keep the trees from taking over the mountainside, and then there won't be the meadows anymore. Okay, now some other things that are happening is as we warm the mountains, we are having a lot of pine tree die-off. The mountains are getting warmer, there's less moisture, the trees get stressed out, and then bark beetles, which always used to live in the tree trunks, now kill the trees. And so all these orange looking trees in here are dead trees. And this is happening all over the United States and into Canada. Up to about 40% of all pine trees in the United States will probably die from this. This also leaves all this dead wood around, which can burn. And if you thought, well, I'm going to go to somewhere beautiful, this is Yellowstone National Park in this picture. And I was a few years ago in Vail, Colorado, and it's like almost half the trees were dead. And these warmer temperatures also, again, animals and plants interacting that didn't used to. Deer have been moving up into moose areas in Canada and New England, and they're bringing ticks and also a brain disease, brain parasite, and they're infecting the moose. And some of these moose are called ghost moose because the ticks, this is a bunch of ticks on this moose behind here. And what they do is to get rid of the ticks, they rub against the trees and it rubs off their fur so they have white patches. And the problem is it's killing them. About half of all moose babies are now dying from parasites. And so anyway, so it's very bad up there. As it gets warmer, the more ticks can survive. And so yes, ticks are actually approaching in this area too. We may not be moose, but if you're taking your dog out, make sure it's got some stuff on it to keep the ticks off. Okay, so, oh, and you too, because ticks are not fun. Okay, malaria. As warmer water moves in to make new wetlands, we're going to get more swamps and we're going to get more malaria mosquitoes back, which the United States used to have a lot of malaria in it in places like Washington, D.C., which used to be kind of a swamp and it was drained. But now we expect to see perhaps more. So these red areas are places that are expected to get more malaria mosquitoes. Okay, so that's the end of that part. And we're going to go on to look at ocean acidification. All right.